Good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. I want to thank the people that are standing with me today, the community leaders that fight this fight every day out in the neighborhoods, the state and local officials that fight this fight locally and in Harrisburg, and the Black clergy who lift many Philadelphian spirits up in times of despair. So thank you. This past weekend, 2 children were shot within 24 hours. One of them, Nicolette Rivera, a 2-year-old girl, became the 278th murder in the city of Philadelphia this year. As a mother, my heart aches for their parents and for their families. Philadelphia has a homicide rate that continues to increase. In 2018, Philadelphia's homicide rate was 351, which is a 41% increase over just 5 years ago. And in 2019, the rate is continuing to climb. We now have the highest per capita murder rate of any of the top 10 largest cities, higher than Chicago. This is not acceptable. As a Philadelphian, I'm outraged by this violence. As an elected official, I'm tired of thoughts and prayers. They're not enough. We need to lean in, work together, and fix this, because this is fixable. And I'll talk about this in a few minutes. Other cities have lowered their homicide rates using specific strategies. This is doable. Today, my office is releasing a report on the economic impact of gun violence. The human impact of gun violence is devastating and immeasurable. We focused on the economic impact, the economic benefit from a reduction in homicides. And specifically, we focused on housing values, as that has been shown to be the largest source of economic gain in cities when a homicide rate is decreased. Before I get into what the analysis showed, I want to talk about one thing, and that is that in Philadelphia, like cities around the country, homicide impacts young black men between the ages of 18 to 35 the most. And homicides occur in the poorest, most disadvantaged neighborhoods. But this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not because of bad people or bad parenting. This needs to be looked at within a historical context, the context of structural racism and residential segregation that our own government, starting in the 1930s, did to our communities. And it's through this lens that I want all of us here in Philadelphia to lean in and work on this problem, this collective problem of homicide in our city. Our analysis showed a clear link between homicides and decreased home values for residential properties nearby. We also found that investing in violence reduction strategies with proven track records of success pay for themselves through higher residential home values and therefore increased tax revenue. And I'll repeat that, it pays for themselves, and I'll go into more detail with that. The key is that investment has to be in the right programs. Research shows that a combination of anti-violence programs, when enacted together, as they have been in other cities successfully, can create a significant reduction in homicides. I want to be clear that these anti-violence programs should be undertaken as part of a larger comprehensive strategy to fight poverty. However, we must stop the killing first, so we must focus on anti-violence initiatives that work. There are 3 programs that have been found to work in cities around the country. All of these programs specifically focus on individuals that are most likely to shoot, that are most likely to be the shooters. These programs are group violence intervention, otherwise known as focused deterrence, which pairs offers of assistance with threats of punishment, cure violence, a community-oriented public health approach, and cognitive behavior therapy, which is a preventative approach that aims to improve decision-making. A combination of these 3 programs was implemented in Oakland, California in 2012. This was credited with reducing gun homicides by 32% over 5 years. Oakland's homicide rate has declined by 50% over 5 years. 32% of that was based specifically on implementing these 3 programs. New Orleans took a similar approach and implemented these 3 programs and had a 17% reduction in their homicide rate over 2 years. Thomas Abt, a researcher at Harvard and an author of a recent book, Bleeding Out, estimates that to reduce homicides by 10% a year costs about $30,000 per homicide. For the city of Philadelphia, $30,000 per homicide would mean a total cost of $11 million per year. We found that the potential tax revenue generated by reducing homicides would surpass the program cost by year 2. And at the end of 5 years, the city would see a gain of $71 million after the cost of funding the programs. And that $71 million is only from the increased property tax revenue. That's not including other possible economic benefits. And this is money that could be used to fund longer-term solutions to poverty and to keep people in their homes in gentrifying neighborhoods, to allow them to build wealth instead of forcing them out. Imagine what this could do for our city. Most importantly, reducing the homicide rate by 10% per year for 5 years would mean that 318 people that would have lost their lives will be saved. And imagine what that means. Imagine what that means for their families and for the communities impacted by this trauma. Our homicide rate would be 230, the lowest in our history, or at least recent history. Reducing homicides will take a coordinated effort and a comprehensive plan with immediate action steps to reduce the violence. I won't be just another voice decrying this violence. We have to take action. Let's lean in, work together, and do this. Earlier this week, the Kenney administration mentioned that they plan to work with District Attorney Larry Krasner to implement group violence intervention or focused deterrence in the next budget. While I'm heartened by this, and I know that DA Krasner is committed to doing this work, as I spoke to him about it, I'm also hesitant to give a full-throated endorsement, as we shouldn't wait until the next budget cycle, July 1st, to do this. And this needs to be done now, and it needs to be done in the specific, detailed way that these other cities have done it. My office's report makes a strong case for investing in group violence intervention, cure violence, and cognitive behavior therapy, and we've laid out a framework for what this should look like. I'm calling on Mayor Kenney to implement this 3-pronged strategy and to work with the district attorney and community stakeholders and others to make sure this is successful. I'm asking City Council to support these programs, in addition to the other good work that they are doing. And I'm calling on every Philadelphian to demand action now. This affects all of us. This is an investment in the future of this city and the lives of our people. We need to do this, and reducing our homicide rate is possible if we lean in and do what these other cities have done. Thank you. And now, Sorry. Thank you. I'd like to introduce State Senator Anthony Williams, who's working hard on this issue at the state level for the people of Philadelphia.
I don't mind the lack of applause for me, but for those of us who are gathered here, and I've been around this unfortunate set of circumstances for my teenage life, my adult life, and now my twilight life. What Rebecca Reinhardt has done with her office goes well beyond words. It is putting someone who has power in a position and holding all of us to account. That's what the controller's office is supposed to do. It's supposed to call out inaction and speak directly to those of us who are in office to what we should do and how we should do it on behalf of those who are the least of us in our community and city. So I'd ask us to readdress her vision in the form that we all do. We shouldn't have a mild clapping of hands. We should have an extraordinary greeting and thankful praise of her actions. So let's readdress Rebecca Reinhardt right now. I will tell you that Azika, Sequoia, Devell, Layla, Mohammed, Brandon, all shot at Finnegan Playground, June 16th. Azira, Tyree, Shamir, Jabril, Donovan, Milton, all shot as well. July 28th, 2600 block of Carroll Street. August 10th, McCreesh Playground. Sabu, David, Tyreek. The baby who lost her life, Marcus Yates, and thousands of others who lost their lives during the gang war period in Philadelphia. It's nice, and I shared this with Commissioner Reinhardt. For those who doubt the resolve of Philadelphians and their ability to fix this, you need to simply go back to the 70s when Philadelphia was the #1 gang haven in homicides in this country. #1 gang haven in homicides in this country. Then Frank Rizzo, who was not necessarily known of liberal heart or civic engagement of people of color, managed to connect with Benny Swan in an organization called Crisis Intervention. We went from being the #1 place where young men were shot and murdered to 0 within 2 years. This is not simply a crisis of guns, this is a crisis of inaction. A tolerance that human beings are not all equal and seen in the same way. Reflected in this report tells you where we live, how we live, and the circumstances under which we live. It's documented proof and truth that all lives are not valued the same way. And despite the fact that people will claim that they're progressive, it means progress, not just being a label. It requires to be engaged in ways that make you unsafe, uncomfortable, and frankly hearing things that make you not understand why people do these things. We can point to the testimony of when the crack era existed and thousands of families got together and created marching drill groups across the city of Philadelphia. And the city funded them under Ed Rendell. And it sustained themselves for about 10 years in many communities that had it and gave children a different vision of what they would be as adults. Some are in police departments today as we speak who are law enforcement people. This is not an intractable problem. This is not something that people should have walked away, but frankly, we did. The consequence of it is we turn on the news and we're numb to the fact that a 2-year-old has lost their life in a home that doing nothing violent, but what most importantly was predictable. What Commissioner Reinhardt has done, and I'm grateful to be here with so many extraordinary human beings who are engaged in this conversation and frankly this fight. Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, Reverend Broadnax from the Black Clergy, my cousin Bilal Qayyum, are all part of those of us who have been talking for a while about this. And more important than talking about it, meeting people on the ground. there are programs and actions that can work. The governor recently created a commission on gun violence across Pennsylvania, recognizing that homicides, domestic violence, suicides are all part of the conversation. I'm grateful that the next person I will introduce is a member of that commission. But I want to tell you that those of us that sometimes are considered annoyances because we talk too loudly in inappropriate places are now aligned by those who can no longer speak, those lost souls who've been murdered. I want you to be very clear. We're more than an annoyance. We're not a political calculation. And for those who talk about grandstanding, I could give two hoots about your opinion. Get your behind off the benches and into these neighborhoods. Combine with those of us who understand what it means to live amongst this tyranny. My belief is this, that Rebecca Reinhardt serves a unique space. She's a young woman, a young mother. She's a white female who didn't grow up in my hood, who doesn't have to be connected with this, can pick up the label and run for any office she chooses to simply because she fits into a brand. She decided to step out of her comfort zone, no different than when we did it in the civil rights movement, no different than when we did it fighting for women, no different than when we fought for those who are disabled, no different when we decided that discrimination and racism is intolerant in this country and we need to move against it. But it requires people who are in their comfort spaces to move in different ways. She's taken a bold step. We need to support her in that effort. We need to take this report and ram it down the throats of people who are most accountable and are talking about waiting. This city has a surplus. And we're talking about $11 million. They have a surplus of above $11 million. Let me tell you, if the level of homicide had happened in Chestnut Hill, Rittenhouse Square, Liberties, would we be talking about next year's budget? It is not raining. It's a tsunami of death. And we should be reacting to it in just that way. I'm grateful for Rebecca Reinhardt. And I'm most inspired by this next person coming to the podium. A person who has her own personal story, unfortunately, of loss of life, but didn't get captivated and crushed by that loss and pain, has taken it to public office and is enacting public legislation and driving us towards these remedies and solutions. I'm honored to introduce my friend, my colleague, my comrade in arms, Representative Movita Johnson-Harrell.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I really want to thank Comptroller Reinhardt for the work that she's done on the cost of homicide to Philadelphia, but not only that, on bringing awareness to the issue of the need for funding. I am the mother, the daughter, the sister, and the cousin of a homicide victim. I lost 4 members of my family to homicide in this city. So I'm not sitting up in Harrisburg because I want to be there. I'm sitting up in Harrisburg because the same things that the controller showed in this report, we proved to be successful in 2013. When we did the focused deterrent strategy, which was underfunded, by the way, $150,000 for 2 years, we had over a 35% reduction in homicide in the first year. It works. Group violence intervention, cure violence, cognitive behavior therapy. It works. We all have to come together to make sure this happens. I'm so grateful that I've gotten the support of the House of Representatives, the support of the Senate, and we have been working with the city to try and make this come to fruition. We can't wait any longer. You know, people see this stuff on the news and they go past it with the minimum of concern, but I can't watch the news. I can't read the paper, because when those mothers lose their children, I know what that feels like. It's debilitating. It's debilitating. And we can fix this? That does not make sense. We need to all stand together to make this a reality. This is not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It takes commitment. It takes commitment to the city of Philadelphia, to the people of Philadelphia that we're responsible for. Every day I open my eyes, the only thing I'm worried about is how I can try and keep our kids from dying. And I promised that to my 18-year-old son as he lay cold and dead on a slab. So I want to thank our controller for taking a stand on this, for really looking at this issue, for coming up with solutions and results, because we can't do thoughts and prayers anymore. And we can't afford to lose another life to homicide. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Councilman Kenyatta Johnson.
I want to take a moment and thank our city controller, Rebecca Reinhardt, for her dedication and her commitment for stepping up to the plate in addressing this issue. I chair the special committee on gun violence, and most of you already know that this has always been a passion of mine since 1998, when I lost a cousin to a senseless act of gun violence in the streets of South Philadelphia. And so for me, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of us not coming together, unified as a city, focusing on this particular issue. I want to thank not only the elected officials and the members of the clergy who are here, but we have important, credible messengers, individuals who were once problems in our community, but now they are returning to our neighborhoods and providing solutions for us to save our neighborhoods. And I want to thank the gentlemen who are around, who are standing behind me, and ask for all of you to give them a real big round of applause. These group of men did not come out here standing as elected official props. These are the individuals who are outside on the ground doing the work to save the lives of our young men. They speak that language. They speak the language of telling these young men, we have a choice to make. If you put down the gun, or you face the consequences of death or jail. As a member of the Special Committee on Gun Violence, in which I chair, I recently introduced a $10 million transfer ordinance to address the issue of addressing youth gun violence programs and resources that the city of Philadelphia offers. We have made some progress over the last 2 years to fund programs to address this type of issue, but all of you are right, it's not enough. We need to be we need to be focused on this issue the same way we are on the opioid crisis. The same type of support the people who are addicted to opioids receive is the same type of support that we should be addressing. And to be quite frank with you, it's truly unfortunate that we lost a toddler and another toddler was shot. But I'm gonna be upfront with everyone that's here today. Every time I wake up in the morning and I see an African-American young man shot down as a result of some senseless act of gun violence, or I'm called to speak to a mother who lost her son to gun violence, or asked to speak at a funeral because we lost another young person to gun violence, it always sickens my heart. This is an issue that keeps me up at night. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. This is not about politics for me. This is about the safety of them growing up inside this city of Philadelphia. And they already have 2 strikes against them. One, they're African-American boys growing up. One, they're African-American, 2, they're boys. And so the cards are already stacked against them growing up here in this city with all this violence that's taking place. So I thank Rebecca Reinhardt, our city controller, for stepping up to the plate. Your report has my full support. We do have an ordinance that we're advocating an amount of $10 million for those resources to go toward programs and resources to help us reduce gun violence that we're here in the city of Philadelphia. But as a man of faith also, I recognize that faith without works is dead. And this gentleman has been on the forefront in addressing this issue of youth gun violence. And anytime that I call him for a prayer vigil, and I do believe prayer changes things, this gentleman always steps up to the plate with his organization, the Black Clergy in the city of Philadelphia. I'm going to ask Mr. Reverend Jay Broadnex to please come to the microphone.
Thank you, Councilman, and want to certainly add my thanks to Controller Reinhardt for taking the time and taking the initiative out of her area of expertise to take a little different approach to this problem that's causing so much heartbreak in our city. I come at this as well from a personal standpoint, whereas one of my nephew was murdered, as well as one of the members of my church has a son who was murdered. And this is a heart-wrenching issue for all of us. I know we're always focused, as we should be, on what violence does to families and communities, but I don't think we can afford not to look at this problem from every possible angle and work to reduce violence by any means necessary. Also want to recognize that Ceasefire PA is supportive of this issue as well. We can't quantify or put a dollar value on the cost of a mother's or father's tears, but we can quantify the direct benefits of investing in solutions that save lives. So while talking dollars and property values may seem impersonal, they're indicators of a quality of life that can bespeak an attitude of either frustration or satisfaction in a community. And when frustration levels rise and alternatives and opportunities don't seem available, I believe that it can lead to a climate that fosters elevated levels of violence. We've seen that proven through the statistics. But I'm also foolish enough to believe that Philadelphia is just as smart, just as innovative, and just as willing to invest itself in solutions that actually work than any of those cities that are seeing declines in violence. We are just as good as they are, and we can make this work. We can fix this. But we can only fix this if everybody, from community stakeholders to government to law enforcement to academia to criminal justice folk to faith leaders to the business community, is at the table, and everybody is willing to make the investment in proven strategies. We can't just arrest our way out of this problem anymore. So let's come together. Let's make the investment that will make the vision of a peaceful city of brotherly love and sisterly affection a reality. We can make this happen. Let's work together and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Now, happy to open it up to any questions that anyone has. So I think it's about the strategy, and that's why I'm calling on the mayor to implement this three-pronged strategy. I think that what's been done to date, the numbers show that it hasn't resulted in lower homicide numbers, and we need to do what these other cities have done that have proven to have results. Council has done great work around gun violence. Right now, I think it's up to the mayor to implement, to verbally say he will implement and then to do it.
Rebecca, if I can follow up. On the group violence intervention, pure violence and cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of these same initiatives are in Mayor Kenny's plan that he released in January. And what he has said is give us a year to implement. And I guess what I'm asking is, say, with the spate of murders, that it should be implemented right now, at this moment.
Yeah, so the question is the mayor implementing these now? To my understanding, and from my knowledge, the programs that have been implemented so far are not focused specifically on the individuals that are known to be the shooters or would-be shooters. So I think that that's what the ask is, to do these specific programs.
With the surplus, the budget surplus being what it is, probably the largest it's been in years.
Yes.
How do we, council people, what is your feeling about going to that surplus and doing something with it now? Because we're in a red zone with the city, and it needs to be implemented.
Yes. And I mentioned earlier, I have a transfer ordinance already that I already introduced. We have a hearing coming up on November the 12th, and we're going to be advocating for support of the $12 million, of the $10 million to go toward the violence prevention programs that was mentioned, and other programs that goes toward reducing violence here in the city of Philadelphia. So we've started that process already, and again, the hearing is going to be on November the 12th. But $10 million is still a drop in the bucket. Again, if you look at the opioid crisis and the funding that's allotted to address that issue, it doesn't even compare. And so we're in a state of emergency right now. We must do everything that's possible to get everybody to the table, give them the support that they need. And I'm really big on the individuals, as I mentioned, who are standing behind me. These are the credible messengers. We're the politicians, right? But these are the individuals who are out in the street that need significant funding to support their efforts to get these young men off the corners. And that's part of the conversation that we're here advocating when it comes to the resources that we think that these groups need. Thank you.
Do you have a feel for what the mayor may be thinking about along those lines?
We're currently in negotiation with his team right now. But make no mistake about it, this has always been a priority of mine. I know you're reporters, you go and you do your research and you look at the comments and the conversations that we're having in council. I've always been a strong advocate of making sure this should be the number one priority here in our city, because at the end of the day, we have a tale of two cities. Some people are doing great. We see cranes all across some parts of the city and development taking place. And we have other neighborhoods, such as Strawberry Mansion, Point Breeze, Grays Ferry, parts of Southwest Philadelphia where people are being shot down. And one thing Rebecca picked up that's pretty significant. In areas of high poverty, that's where you see the violence at. And so with her report and the resources that we bring forward in addressing this issue, yes, you'll see property values go up, but also you'll see safety in helping these young men get off the street. But most importantly, not only just the young men, but our children and our seniors should be safe as well as a result of her report and us putting some resources behind these type of programs. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think Senator Williams wanted to address something.
My hope is that we don't travel down the obvious path that we tend to. It's not about what the mayor's not doing and what we are doing. This is about the fact that let's assume everybody has the best of intentions. And Vince, I'm speaking specifically to you. No, I know you're listening. I'm not saying that. But I want you to be very clear. This should not be written that we feel the administration is not trying. But what we're saying is what we hear in our neighborhoods. All of you are not doing enough. All of us are responsible. All of us have blood on our hands. All of us are responsible for the lack of a policy. So to the extent that the mayor is the mayor, he's important. But understand something. If we're not persuading him effectively enough, it's our failure because we haven't persuaded him. The bottom line is this, that whatever program exists, that 2-year-old baby is never coming back. That mother and that neighborhood feels inundated with the level of violence and are afraid And in this country where it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we have none. So Americans are making requests. So my hope is that we don't reduce it to our little political perspective. It's us, the mayor. It's not. It's about policies that we know work. It's about the plea of a mother who ran for office and won and has a program that's working in other states and other cities across America. It's about a man who's now a council person who unfortunately was on the streets of Philadelphia at a point in time and saw things he should have never seen as a teenager, is now taken to a position of policy. That's what this is about. This is about understanding what works and us making sure that we fund it at the appropriate level and don't shortcut our way to it. Okay?
But Senator, if I can follow up on that. If
Yeah, you did.
If everyone agrees that group violence intervention, pure violence, and cognitive behavioral therapy work, the House members, the senators, the mayor, why hasn't it been implemented?
Because we all talk in our silos. We all talk in our silos. And frankly, it's missed a Rebecca Reinhardt, who is not part of that. With all due respect, and it's very uncomfortable to talk about it, race and class in this country resound in a lot of different areas. This is one. And so when people talk about it, it's a tragedy, but it happened over there. It didn't happen in my neighborhood. When people in the suburbs see it, it didn't happen out here. Just like crack happened in all of our neighborhoods, and America sort of said, oh, well, you know, they're drug addicts. And then when opioid happened across Sea Line Avenue, America said, we got a drug problem. We got a violence problem in America, right? And so that's all I'm trying to say. That's the reason why I think we're operating.
Sure. So the question is around how we determine causation and not just correlation, probably, in the factors. So what we did is we took data from the police department, every homicide over 4,000 since 2006. We mapped them. We then pulled residential home sale values going back the same time from 2006 to 2018, over 200,000 residential sales. So we took each homicide and mapped it and located residential sales that occurred 60 days before and 60 days after, okay? We took the difference there. We then compared that to the price difference 60 days before and 60 days after to residential sales further away that were unaffected by a homicide. And through that process, we determined causation and that each homicide is responsible for that 2.3% depression of home values. And I will add that this was peer reviewed. We sent it out and had it peer reviewed by professors in this field at Temple, Penn, and the University of Chicago, and they confirmed the results, so I feel pretty comfortable with them. Yeah, and we actually have a 6-page addendum on the methodology that goes even into more detail, which we could just give you afterwards. But yes, we spend a lot of time and great care in stripping out other variables that would determine differences in that. Well, the Office of Violence Prevention is the mayor's office to handle violence prevention. So they are the office under the mayor's authority, and they would need to, under the mayor's oversight, but they would need to be heavily involved in this. Well, I mean, I don't want to specifically say how it would be implemented because it needs to be coordinated with the district attorney and other stakeholders. But I do think that the mayor, the city, needs to be involved. So I don't want to discount their role. At the same time, we need to make sure that these programs are implemented in the right way.
One of the things that we've been waiting for 2 years should be funded, what shouldn't be funded. So I wonder about the wisdom of introducing more programs before we know what's actually working and what's not, what should be funded and what should not be funded.
So I understand that question. I think we know what works because we're taking it from other cities, and that's what's in this report. And I think that the first step is for the mayor and the Office of Violence Prevention to digest the information, and we'll see what they do. I think if there's inaction, then I'm not going away. So, to be continued. Yes, I apologize. We're not going away. And I do want to say also one thing about. It was mentioned by several of my colleagues about the issue of class and race in this, and I do think that one of my goals, in addition to getting these programs done and getting the homicide rate down, is to make all of Philadelphia care as much as they should. And so whether that be the business community, whether that be the wealthier neighborhoods, whether that be the neighborhood that I live in and raise my daughter, I think we all need to lean in and solve this with a feeling of empathy and collective responsibility. Anything else?
Seeing that this has worked in cities notoriously known for their homicide rates like New Orleans, Oakland, why is Philadelphia just not coming around to this now? And congratulations for you to move it forward. Why just now?
I don't want to. It's a good question. Why hasn't it been done yet? I'd rather look forward and just let's do it. Let's work together. We're here. Let's do it now.
You say that it's a 2.3% depression in home values. That's citywide, correct?
No, that's 2.3% depression close to the location of the homicide. It's actually within 0.7 miles, about 11 city blocks.
Do you see the numbers differ depending upon these groups? For example, might that 2.3% be higher in, say, West Philly or North Philly, where there are more shootings than, say, in Kensington or...
So that's it. Yeah, the 2.3% is an average across the 200,000 residential sales, 4,000 homicides. So, but we could talk after if you have more detailed questions. Okay. Thank you very much.